The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was always cold. Captain Han Ji-woo pulled his blue uniform jacket tighter as he watched the 12 species debate the fate of an entire world. The massive chamber stretched high above him, with floating platforms for each member species arranged in a perfect circle. At the center, a holographic display showed Kepler 442c, the Viridian homeworld. The planet looked sick. Where once green continents had covered most of the surface, now brown and yellow patches spread like a disease. The solar flare had hit 3 months ago, stripping away the magnetic field that protected the world from deadly radiation. Every day, more of the great forest cities died. The cost would be enormous, said Speaker Zenth, the Zephyrian representative. His crystalline body caught the chamber's blue light and threw rainbow patterns on the walls. We estimate it would take 40% of our combined fleet capacity to evacuate the Viridians. Captain Ji-woo shifted in his observer seat. As a human diplomatic observer, he had no vote in the council. Earth was still too new to galactic politics, still considered a junior species. But he could watch, and he could report back to his superiors. The Kraxan military commander, General Thack, stood on his platform. His gray, armored skin made him look like a walking tank. The Viridians have contributed little to galactic defense. Their pacifist nature makes them useless in times of conflict. Why should we risk our ships and crews for a species that cannot even protect itself? Ambassador Kim Seokjin, the senior human representative, stood up on the human platform. With respect, General Thack, the Viridians have shared their botanical knowledge freely with all species. Their healing plants have saved millions of lives across the galaxy. Plants, General Thack said with disgust. They think like plants, slow, weak, unable to adapt quickly to threats. This solar flare proves they are not fit to survive in a dangerous galaxy. Dr. Park Minji, sitting next to Captain Ji-woo in the observer section, whispered, "He doesn't understand. The Viridians aren't weak. They're just different. They think in terms of centuries, not days." On the center display, new images appeared. These showed Viridian families in their underground shelters. The plant-like beings moved slowly, their green skin growing pale from lack of sunlight. Their children, small saplings barely reaching adult knees, looked up at the artificial lights with large, sad eyes. One image showed a young Viridian tending to a dying garden. His name was Veltar, according to the data feed. He was one of the few Viridians who had learned to speak other galactic languages. In the image, he carefully watered plants that were clearly beyond saving, his face showing determination even as tears fell from his large eyes. "Look at them," said Counselor Vex from the Hegemony platform. "They waste time on dead plants while their world dies around them. This is not wisdom. This is foolishness." Captain Ji-woo felt anger building in his chest. These beings were talking about millions of lives as if they were discussing cargo shipments. He had read the reports about Viridian society. They had created cities that lived and breathed, where buildings were grown rather than built. Their medicine could cure diseases that killed other species. Their agricultural techniques could turn dead worlds into gardens. But they were slow to anger, slow to fight, slow to ask for help. In their culture, asking for assistance was seen as admitting failure. So they had sent only one simple message to the Galactic Council. "Our world is dying. We request aid if it can be spared." Speaker Zenth's voice echoed through the chamber. "We must consider practical matters. The Viridian homeworld is in a dangerous region of space. Their star is unstable and may produce more flares. Any rescue operation would put our ships at risk." "And for what?" added Counselor Vex. To relocate a species that produces nothing but plants and poetry? Our resources would be better spent protecting worlds that contribute to galactic security and prosperity. Ambassador Kim stood again. The Viridians have never asked for much from the galaxy. They have shared their knowledge freely. They have never started wars or claimed territory that wasn't theirs. Doesn't that count for something? Sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford, General Thack replied. The galaxy is becoming more dangerous. Every year, we need species that can fight, that can build weapons, that can defend themselves. The Viridians are a burden we can no longer carry. Dr. Park Minji gripped Captain Jiwoo's arm. They're really going to abandon them, she whispered. 12 billion Viridians, and they're just going to let them die. The vote was called. 1. By 1, the species cast their decisions. The Zephyrians voted no. The Craxans voted no. The Hegemony voted no. The Collective voted no. Down the line it went, each vote sealing the fate of an entire civilization. When Ambassador Kim cast humanity's vote in favor of rescue, it was meaningless. The final tally was 11 votes against, 1 vote in favor. The Viridians would be left to die. The motion fails, Speaker Zenth announced. The Council will not authorize a rescue operation for the Viridian homeworld. May this serve as a lesson to all species about the importance of self-reliance and strength. Captain Jiwoo watched the holographic display as it switched to showing refugee estimates. The numbers were devastating. Within 6 months, the Viridian population would drop from 12 billion to perhaps a few 100,000 survivors in the deepest shelters. Within a year, even those would be gone. Ambassador Kim sat down heavily, his face gray with defeat. He had known the vote would fail, but he had hoped that other species might show some compassion. Instead, they had shown only cold calculation. After the session ended, Captain Jiwoo found himself walking with Dr. Park through the corridors of the council station. Other diplomats passed them, already discussing the next item on the galactic agenda, as if they hadn't just condemned an entire species to extinction. We have to do something, Dr. Park said quietly. We can't just let this happen. What can we do? Captain Jiwoo replied. We're just humans. We don't have the resources or the ships to evacuate 12 billion people. But even as he said it, he was thinking. Earth had been building ships faster than any other species in recent years. Human industry was booming, and the fleet was growing every month. They had colonies spread across dozens of systems, each one hungry for new knowledge and new allies. Maybe we don't need to ask permission, Dr. Park said, stopping in the middle of the corridor. Maybe we just need to do what's right. Captain Jiwoo looked at her, then at the small communication device on his wrist. He could send a message to Earth Fleet Command right now. He could tell them about the vote, about the abandonment, about the millions of lives hanging in the balance. He made his decision. His fingers moved across the device, typing a simple message. Council has abandoned the Viridians. Request permission to organize humanitarian response. Time is running out. The side message sent with a soft beep. In a few hours, it would reach Earth. In a few more hours, humanity would have to decide what kind of species they wanted to be. As they walked back to their quarters, Captain Jiwoo looked out through the station's massive windows at the stars. Beyond, somewhere out there, the Viridians were dying while the galaxy turned away. But maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't have to die alone. The message from Captain Jiwoo reached Earth at 0347 hours Geneva time. Within minutes, it was on the desk of Admiral Choi Subin, commander of Earth Fleet. She read it twice, then called an emergency meeting of the Human Defense Council. By dawn, representatives from every major Earth government sat around the oval table in the underground command center beneath Seoul. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as officials reviewed the data from the Galactic Council meeting. 12 billion lives, said President Chen from the Asian Federation. That's more than the entire population of Earth. The Galactic Council has made their position clear, replied Director Petrov from the European Union. If we act against their wishes, we risk sanctions, trade restrictions, maybe even military action. Admiral Choi stood at the head of the table, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had fought in the Titan mining wars 20 years ago, back when humanity was still learning to fight in space. Now she commanded the largest fleet Earth had ever built. "Let me be clear about what we're discussing," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. The Viridians have maybe 6 months before their population starts dying in large numbers. To mount a rescue operation of this size, we would need to commit almost our entire civilian transport fleet, plus military escorts. Engineer Lee Hyun-woo pulled up a holographic display showing ship designs. "We've been working on rapid deployment habitat modules for our own colonies. With some modifications, we could house Viridian families during transport, but we're talking about thousands of ships, millions of tons of supplies." Dr. Yoon So-young, Earth's leading expert in atmospheric processing, shook her head. "It's not just about transport. The Viridians have a symbiotic relationship with their plants. They can't survive long without them. We'd need to bring entire ecosystems, not just people." "So what you're telling us," said Secretary Williams from the American states, "is that this is impossible." "No," Admiral Choi replied firmly. "I'm telling you it's the biggest challenge humanity has ever faced. But impossible? We've done impossible things before." The room fell silent. Everyone remembered the stories their grandparents told about the early days of space colonization. How Earth's population had been told it was impossible to terraform Mars, impossible to build cities in the asteroid belt, impossible to travel between star systems in reasonable time. Humanity had done all of those things anyway. President Park, from the Korean Republic, leaned forward. "What would we need?" Lee Hyun-woo's fingers danced over his tablet, bringing up construction schedules and resource calculations. "Every shipyard in the Sol system working at maximum capacity. We'd need to convert cargo haulers, passenger liners, even some of the old generation ships that brought our grandparents to the colonies." "Materials?" asked Admiral Choi. "The asteroid mines can provide raw materials. The Luna factories can handle the manufacturing. But we're talking about a timeline of maybe 8 weeks to get the first rescue ships ready." Dr. Yoon added, "And we'd need to prepare colonies to receive refugees. New Terra has the space, but we'd need to build new cities, new atmosphere processors, agricultural domes for Viridian plants." The debate continued for hours. Some argued that humanity couldn't afford to anger the Galactic Council. Others pointed out that Earth had always been an outsider in galactic politics anyway. A few suggested a compromise, offering to take in a small number of Viridian refugees rather than attempting a full evacuation. It was President Park who finally called for quiet. "I want to tell you all a story," she said, her voice soft but clear. "My grandmother lived through the Seoul flood of 2089. The government said it was too expensive to evacuate the old districts, that the people there should have moved to higher ground years earlier. But my grandfather didn't listen to the government. He and his neighbors organized their own rescue operation. They saved thousands of lives with nothing but fishing boats and determination. She looked around the table. The Galactic Council thinks the Viridians aren't worth saving because they're different, because they're peaceful, because they think in terms of centuries instead of years. But isn't that exactly why they are worth saving? The vote, when it came, was closer than Admiral Choi had expected. 7 votes in favor of the rescue operation, 5 against. It was enough. Within hours, the announcement went out across Earth's communication networks. Humanity would mount the largest rescue operation in galactic history. They called it Operation Green Haven. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Captain Jin Tae-hyung, a civilian cargo pilot, was among the first to volunteer his ship and crew. "I've got a family of my own," he told the reporters. "I can't imagine watching them die while the galaxy turns away." Shipyards across the Sol system began working around the clock. The massive orbital facilities around Earth hummed with activity, as workers converted every available ship for refugee transport. The asteroid belt mining operations increased production by 300% to provide raw materials. On Luna, engineer Lee Hunwoo stood in the main assembly bay, watching as the first batch of habitat modules rolled off the production line. Each module could house 50 Viridian families and their plant partners. They looked like giant greenhouse domes, with clear walls and complex life support systems. "Will they work?" asked his assistant, watching as robots loaded the modules onto transport ships. Lee Hyunwoo smiled. "They'll have to. We're not building them for a test run. We're building them to save lives." Dr. Yoon So-young was working on an even bigger challenge. On New Terra, Earth's most successful colony world, construction crews were building entire new cities designed for Viridian physiology. The buildings looked more like giant trees than human structures, with living walls and natural light systems. "The Viridians don't just live with nature," she explained to her team. "They are part of nature. Our cities need to work the same way." But not everyone on Earth supported the operation. Protests erupted in several major cities, with crowds demanding that the government focus on human colonies instead of alien refugees. Some Earth corporations worried about the cost and the potential for Galactic Council sanctions. Admiral Choi watched the protests on the news feeds as she stood in her command center. Around her, dozens of officers coordinated the growing fleet of rescue ships. Each day brought new challenges, new problems to solve. "Admiral," called Commander Bae Suzy, her operations officer, "we're getting reports that some Galactic Council species are moving ships to intercept our fleet." Military ships? Unknown. But the Craxons have 3 battle groups in nearby systems. They claim it's routine patrol activity. Admiral Choi nodded, grimly. She had expected this. The Council wouldn't attack human ships directly, but they might try to prevent the rescue through intimidation or bureaucratic delays. "Continue preparations," she ordered. "If the Council wants to stop us, they'll have to do it openly. And somehow, I don't think they want that kind of publicity." By the end of the second week, the first rescue ships were ready to launch. The fleet was massive beyond anything humanity had ever assembled. Converted cargo haulers flew alongside. Luxury passenger liners. Military escorts surrounded civilian transports. Supply ships carried everything from medical equipment to vast quantities of soil and plant nutrients. Captain Ji-woo, who had started it all with his message from the Council, Station stood on the bridge of the lead ship. Through the viewports, he could see dozens of other vessels stretching out into space. Behind them, Earth hung like a blue marble, its cities glowing with the lights of factories working day and night to support the operation. "Fleet reports ready for departure," announced the communications officer. Captain Jiwoo took a deep breath. In a few days, they would reach the Viridian homeworld. They would find out if their ships could handle the radiation, if their habitat modules would work, if 12 billion dying aliens would trust a species they barely knew. "Signal the fleet," he said. "Operation Green Haven is a go. Let's bring them home." The massive fleet began to move, accelerating slowly away from Earth. Behind them, they left a world united in purpose for the first time in generations. Ahead of them lay the greatest rescue mission in galactic history. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, the Galactic Council was already planning their response. The Viridian homeworld looked even worse up close than it had in the Council's holographic displays. Captain Jiwoo stood on the bridge of the rescue fleet's command ship, staring at the dying planet through the radiation-shielded viewport. What had once been vast green continents were now patches of brown and gray, with only small spots of green remaining in the deepest valleys. "Radiation levels are off the charts," reported the science officer. "The solar flare really did strip away most of their magnetic field. It's amazing anything is still alive down there." Commander Bay Susie, who had been put in charge of ground operations, studied her tablet. "Long-range scans show massive underground tunnel systems. That's where most of the survivors are hiding. But even those won't protect them much longer." The human fleet had traveled for 6 days to reach this system. During the journey, they had received exactly 3 communications from the Galactic Council. The first was a formal warning about interference in natural selection. The second was a threat of economic sanctions. The third was a simple message: "You are on your own." Dr. Park Minji had spent the entire journey studying everything humanity knew about Viridian biology and culture. It wasn't much. The plant-like beings were about 2 meters tall when fully grown, with green skin that could photosynthesize sunlight. They lived in harmony with other plants, forming complex relationships that humans didn't fully understand. "The biggest challenge," she explained to the landing teams, "is that we can't just evacuate the Viridians. Each family group has plant partners that they depend on for survival. Some of these relationships go back hundreds of years." Botanist Kang Daniel, who had volunteered for the ground teams, raised his hand. "How do we preserve plants that are dying from radiation? Some of these species might be extinct already." "We save what we can," Dr. Park replied simply. "Every seed, every cutting, every root system that might survive. The Viridians have knowledge about plant preservation that we're only beginning to understand." The first landing shuttles launched while the main fleet maintained orbit. Each shuttle carried teams of scientists, engineers, and medical personnel, along with portable habitat domes and emergency supplies. Commander Bay led the primary landing, teamed to the coordinates of the largest underground shelter. As their shuttle descended through the thin atmosphere, she could see the devastation clearly. Entire forest cities had been reduced to blackened stumps. Rivers that should have been flowing with clean water were now muddy streams, carrying dead vegetation. "There," called the pilot, pointing to a barely visible opening in a hillside. "That's the entrance to Shelter Complex 7. Scans show about 50,000 Viridians inside." The shuttle landed on a flat area that had once been a garden. The ground was covered with the remains of what looked like flower beds, but the plants were all dead and brittle. The landing team stepped out wearing full radiation suits, their equipment beeping constantly as it measured the dangerous energy levels. The shelter entrance was hidden behind a curtain of vines that had somehow survived the radiation. As they approached, the vines parted to reveal two Viridians standing in the doorway. Both were clearly elderly. Their green skin faded to a pale yellow-green, but their large eyes were alert and intelligent. HFY, the team's translator, stepped forward. She had spent months learning the basic Viridian language, though she was far from fluent. In careful, slow words, she explained who they were and why they had come. The response was immediate and heartbreaking. Both Viridians began to weep, a process that involved their skin changing color and releasing a sweet-smelling moisture. Through broken translations, they explained that they had been waiting to die. No one in the galaxy cared about the Viridians. They were too slow, too peaceful, too different. But here were aliens who had traveled across the galaxy just to help them. One of the elderly Viridians was Rindal, a keeper of the deep gardens. The other was Morven, a speaker for the underground communities. They led the human team into the shelter, down winding tunnels that had been carved from living rock. The tunnel walls were covered with bioluminescent plants that provided a soft green light. Despite the radiation above, the underground garden was still beautiful. Plants grew in carefully tended beds along the tunnel walls. Small pools of water reflected the gentle light. But even here, many plants were beginning to wilt and die. "The connections are breaking," Rindal explained through HFY's translation. "When the surface gardens died, part of our souls died with them. The plants down here feel our sadness. They feel the world ending." The main chamber was enormous, carved from solid rock over hundreds of years. Thousands of Viridians sat quietly among their plant partners, tending to gardens that were clearly failing. Children, looking like small saplings, stayed close to their parents. Everyone moved slowly, conservatively, trying to preserve energy. Commander, Bay had seen refugee camps before, but nothing like this. There was no panic, no fighting over resources, no chaos. The Viridians faced their approaching death with quiet dignity, still caring for their plants even as both species slowly died together. "We need to explain the evacuation process," she said to HFY. "But first we need to understand how their plant partnerships work." That's when they met Veltar, the young Viridian who had been seen in the Council broadcasts. He was one of the few who could speak multiple galactic languages, and he had been hoping for rescue even when the elders had given up hope. "Each family has garden partners," he explained in careful, accented galactic standard. "Plants that grow with us, think with us, feel with us. We cannot live without them, and they cannot live without us. If you save only the Viridians, we will die anyway." Dr. Park knelt beside a small family group. The Viridian parents were tending to what looked like a small tree with silver leaves. Their children, barely knee-high, were planting tiny seeds in pots around the tree's base. She realized that this wasn't just gardening, this was family. "Can the plants survive transport?" she asked Veltar. "We have special habitat modules, but it's still a journey of several days." Veltar consulted with the elders in rapid Viridian. The language sounded like wind through leaves, with musical tones that rose and fell like natural songs. Finally, he turned back to the humans. "Rindal says the plants will survive if they stay connected to us. But many of the deep root systems cannot be moved. Plants that have lived here for 1,000 years will die if they are taken from their homes." Commander Bay felt the weight of an impossible choice. They could save the Viridians, but in doing so, they would kill the ancient gardens that were just as much a part of Viridian civilization as the people themselves. "What if we could take samples?" suggested botanist Kang Daniel. "Seeds, cuttings, genetic material. Maybe not the whole plants, but enough to regrow them somewhere safe." The elders debated this for hours while the human teams explored the other shelter complexes. Each underground community faced the same problem. They could survive the journey to human space, but only if they left behind the living heart of their civilization. Dr. Park made a breakthrough when she started studying the biochemical connection between Viridians and their plants. Using portable scanners, she discovered that the relationship was even deeper than anyone had realized. The plants and Viridians shared a form of chemical communication, passing nutrients and information back and forth through direct contact. "It's like they're part of the same organism," she explained to Commander Bay over the radio. "The Viridians aren't just gardeners. They're living parts of a planet-wide ecosystem. Can we recreate that ecosystem on our ships? Maybe. If we can preserve the right chemical balances, the right soil compositions, it'll be like trying to move an entire living world." The human teams worked for 3 days, learning everything they could about Viridian biology and culture. Engineers designed new habitat modules that could maintain the complex chemical relationships between plants and Viridians. Medical teams developed procedures for keeping both species healthy during transport. But the biggest challenge was trust. Many Viridians, especially the elders, were afraid that leaving their homeworld would mean losing their identity forever. They had lived in harmony with this specific planet for thousands of years. How could they maintain their culture on alien worlds, surrounded by alien technology? It was Veltar who finally convinced them. He spoke to gathering after gathering, explaining that death was certain if they stayed, but life was possible if they took the risk. He reminded them that plants spread seeds to grow in new soil. Maybe it was time for the Viridians to do the same. On the 4th day, the first evacuation began. Families carefully dug up their most precious plants, wrapping root systems in specially prepared soil. Ancient seeds were collected and stored in climate-controlled containers. Cuttings from 1,000-year-old trees were preserved in biostasis tubes. Commander Bay watched as the first group of refugees walked slowly up the ramp into a human transport ship. Each Viridian carried a plant partner, and each plant seemed to respond to its caretaker's emotions. As they boarded the ship, the plant's leaves brightened slightly, as if they could sense hope returning. "How many?" she asked her aide. 2 years had passed since the Great Rescue, and New Eden Colony looked nothing like the human settlement it had once been. Director Lim Nyon stood on the observation deck of the colony's central tower, watching the morning sun rise over a landscape that had been transformed beyond recognition. Where once there had been standard human buildings made of metal and concrete, now there were structures that seemed to grow from the earth itself. Viridian architectural techniques had merged with human engineering to create buildings that were alive. Trees formed the support beams, their branches carefully guided to create walls and roofs. Flowering vines provided insulation and air filtration. Gardens flowed seamlessly from one building to another, creating a city that breathed and grew. "The population count is up to 500,000 Viridians," reported her assistant, checking his tablet. "Plus about 200,000 humans. The integration programs are working better than anyone expected." Director Lim smiled, remembering the early days when everyone had worried about whether two such different species could really live together. The fears had been groundless. If anything, humans and Viridians complemented each other perfectly. Dr. Shin Wanho walked through the morning market, marveling at the changes. As a human researcher studying Viridian techniques, he had been among the first to realize the incredible potential of their botanical knowledge. The Viridians didn't just grow plants, they communicated with them, guided their growth, and created living systems that were far more efficient than anything humans had built. "Look at this," said his Viridian colleague Silthara, pointing to a row of vegetables that seemed to glow with health. "These plants are producing 3 times more food than the same species would in traditional human farms." Dr. Shin knelt beside the plants, using his scanner to measure nutrient levels. "How do you do it? We've been studying your techniques for 2 years, and we still don't fully understand the process." Silthara, who had once been a keeper of sacred groves on the Viridian homeworld, placed her hand gently on one of the plants. Immediately, its leaves brightened and stood a little straighter. "You think of plants as separate from yourselves," she explained patiently. "We know that all life is connected. When we touch the plants, we share our energy with them. When they grow strong, they share their strength with us." This exchange was happening all over the human colonies. Viridian refugees had been settled on dozens of worlds, and each one was experiencing revolutionary changes. Human terraforming, which had always been a slow and expensive process, was accelerated dramatically by Viridian plant-shaping techniques. On Mars, ancient Viridian elders were teaching human engineers how to create atmospheric processing plants that were literally plants. Massive, living systems that could convert carbon dioxide to oxygen while growing food and building materials at the same time. In the asteroid belt, Viridian biotechnology was being combined with human mining equipment to create self-repairing systems that could adapt to changing conditions. But the changes weren't just technological. Student Kim Da-yoon, a young human botanist, had been one of the first to truly embrace Viridian philosophy. She spent her days in the New Eden teaching gardens, learning not just what the Viridians knew, but how they thought. "Patience," Elder Silthara told her, as they worked together to guide a young tree's growth. "Your species thinks in terms of days and months, but plants think in seasons and years. To work with them, you must learn to think like them." Kim Da-yoon placed her hands on the tree's trunk, trying to feel the slow movement of nutrients through its systems. It was frustrating at first. Humans were used to immediate results, quick fixes, rapid solutions. But gradually, she began to understand the deeper rhythms of growth and life. "I think I feel it," she whispered. And suddenly the tree's branches shifted slightly, reaching toward better sunlight. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council was watching these developments with growing alarm. What had started as a simple humanitarian rescue was turning into something much more significant. The human colonies were advancing at an unprecedented rate, developing technologies that made other species nervous. Ambassador Zenth of the Zephyrians sent increasingly worried reports back to his home government. "The humans are no longer just a junior species," he wrote. "Their alliance with the Viridians has given them capabilities that rival our own. Their worlds are becoming more productive than ours, their technology more adaptive." The Council's response was predictable. They began imposing trade restrictions on human colonies, claiming that human Viridian biotechnology violated galactic safety standards. They sent inspection teams to human worlds, looking for evidence of dangerous experiments or illegal genetic modifications. But they found something else entirely. They found other species requesting to join the human Viridian alliance. The aquarans, an amphibious species from the Outer Rim, had been struggling with pollution in their ocean worlds. Traditional Galactic Council solutions involved expensive mechanical filters and chemical treatments, but Viridian biofiltration systems, adapted by human engineers for aquatic environments, could clean entire oceans while providing food and energy. The Lithians, a silicon-based species that lived in asteroid fields, had always been considered too strange for normal galactic society. But human adaptability and Viridian biological wisdom found ways to help them thrive in environments that other species couldn't even visit. Director Lim received a coded message from Earth Fleet Command while she was reviewing colony expansion plans. The message was brief but significant. 17 species have formally requested to join the Terran Commonwealth. Council response increasingly hostile. Prepare for sanctions. She called an emergency meeting of the colony leadership, including both human administrators and Viridian elders. The meeting was held in the Grand Assembly, a living building that had been grown rather than built. The walls were formed by massive trees, their branches woven together to create a natural ceiling. Bioluminescent flowers provided gentle lighting, and the air was fresh with the oxygen produced by countless plants. "The Galactic Council is afraid," said Elder Silthara, her voice carrying the wisdom of centuries. "They built their power on the idea that some species are more valuable than others. Our alliance proves that different can be better than superior." Dr. Shin nodded agreement. "We're not just helping individual species anymore. We're proving that cooperation works better than competition." But others were more concerned. Commander Bay Suzy, who had led the original rescue operation and now served as the Commonwealth's security coordinator, pulled up a holographic display showing Council fleet movements. "3 battle groups have moved into nearby systems," she reported. "They claim it's routine patrol activity, but the timing is suspicious. I think they're preparing for something." Student Kim Do-yoon, who had become something of a bridge between human and Viridian thinking, raised a question that everyone was thinking but no one wanted to voice. "What if they try to stop us by force? The Viridians are pacifists. Most of the species joining us aren't military powers. Can we really defend ourselves against the Council?" The room fell silent. This was the fundamental contradiction at the heart of their growing alliance. They were proving that cooperation, biological harmony, and peaceful development could create prosperity beyond anything the galaxy had seen. But the galaxy was still ruled by species that believed in military strength and economic dominance. Elder Silthara spoke slowly, her words carefully chosen. "Our people have always believed that violence creates only more violence. But we also believe in protecting the young, the weak, the growing things that need time to flourish." Director Lim looked around the room at the faces of both species. "We're not just running colonies anymore," she realized. "We're creating a new kind of civilization, and civilizations sometimes have to defend themselves." The meeting continued late into the night, but the conclusion was inevitable. The Terran Commonwealth would have to prepare for war, even as they continued to perfect the arts of peace. Over the following months, human engineering and Viridian biotechnology began working on new kinds of defensive systems. Ships that could heal themselves when damaged. Weapons that could disable rather than destroy. Defense networks that grew like living organisms, adapting to new threats. But the most important development was psychological. The various species of the Commonwealth were learning to think of themselves not as separate groups, but as parts of a larger organism. Humans provided adaptability and determination. Viridians offered wisdom and biological expertise. Aquarans contributed their knowledge of fluid dynamics and environmental systems. Lithians shared their understanding of crystalline technologies and mineral processing. When the first Commonwealth Defense Fleet launched from New Eden's shipyards, the vessels looked unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were grown as much as built, with living hulls that could repair themselves and bio-neural networks that allowed ships to communicate like schools of fish. Admiral Moon Bewley, who had been promoted to command the Commonwealth Fleet, stood on the bridge of the flagship Eden's Heart. Through the bioluminescent displays, she could see data flowing between ships in the fleet, like thoughts moving through a vast brain. The war began not with a declaration, but with silence. On a Tuesday morning, all communications between the Galactic Council and the Terran Commonwealth simply stopped. No trade messages, no diplomatic exchanges, no routine navigation updates. The galaxy's communication networks, controlled by Council species, went dark for Commonwealth worlds. President Park Jin-young stood in the war room beneath Seoul, watching status displays that showed the positions of Council fleets throughout known space. The room was a fusion of human technology and Viridian biotechnology. Walls lined with living computers that processed information like neural networks, while flowering vines provided both oxygen and a sense of calm. 17 battle groups, reported Admiral Moon Bewley via secure connection from the Commonwealth flagship. They're not hiding their intentions anymore. Full combat formations, moving toward our outer colonies. General Thak's voice crackled through the communication system, broadcast on all frequencies so that every Commonwealth world could hear. Citizens of the illegal Terran Commonwealth, you have violated galactic law by harboring genetic deviants and spreading biological contamination. Surrender your leadership for trial, and your populations will be relocated to approved reservation worlds. President Park looked around the room at the faces of his advisors, humans, Viridians, Aquarans, Lithians, and representatives from a dozen other species who had joined the Commonwealth. 2 years ago, most of these species had never spoken to each other. Now they were preparing to fight together against overwhelming odds. Recommendations? He asked quietly. Ambassador Veltar, who had grown from a young refugee into one of the Commonwealth's most important diplomatic voices, spoke first. The Council expects us to surrender or scatter. They believe that different species cannot truly unite when facing serious danger. But we're not just different species anymore, added Dr. Shin Won-ho. The bio-neural networks connect our fleets like a single organism. Our ships can coordinate in ways that traditional fleets cannot. Admiral Moon's image appeared on the main display, transmitted from the bridge of Eden's Heart. Behind her, the HFY bridge crew worked at stations that seemed to grow from the ship's living hull. The Council fleets are using standard battle formations developed hundreds of years ago. They expect us to fight like they do. Ship against ship, force against force. Sage Threnokis, an ancient Viridian philosopher who had become one of the Commonwealth's strategic advisors, spoke in his slow, thoughtful way. Life does not fight like machines. Life adapts, grows, flows around obstacles. Perhaps it is time to show the galaxy what we have learned. The first engagement came at Kepler Station, one of the Commonwealth's outer research facilities. Council forces expected to find a lightly defended human outpost. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented. The Commonwealth fleet appeared, to scatter as the Council ships approached, breaking formation and fleeing in different directions. General Thak, commanding the Council forces, smiled with satisfaction. As expected, They have no military discipline. But Captain Jin Tae-hyung, commanding a squadron of bioships, was following a plan that had been developed through months of joint human-Viridian strategic thinking. His ships didn't flee, they flowed, moving like a school of fish responding to a predator. The Council ships pursued individual Commonwealth vessels, trying to destroy them one by one. But as they spread out across the system, they lost their formation cohesion. And that's when the Commonwealth spring their trap. From behind asteroids and gas clouds, more Commonwealth ships appeared. But these weren't traditional warships. They were bioweapon platforms that released clouds of engineered organisms, not to kill, but to disable. Microscopic organisms that could eat through electronic systems while leaving organic tissue unharmed. Spores that could disrupt neural networks and cause temporary paralysis. Within minutes, half the Council fleet was drifting helpless in space. Their crews were unharmed but unconscious, their ships dead in the water. "This is impossible," General Thack transmitted as his own flagship systems began failing. "Biological weapons are banned by galactic law." "These aren't weapons," Admiral Moon replied calmly. "They're natural organisms, modified to disable rather than destroy. Your crews will wake up in a few hours with nothing worse than headaches." The victory at Kepler Station was just the beginning. Across the galaxy, Commonwealth forces used similar tactics. Ships that could split apart and recombine like living cells. Defense networks that adapted to enemy attacks like immune systems. Weapons that could disable entire fleets without killing a single crew member. But the real shock came when the Council fleet arrived at New Terra, expecting to find the Commonwealth capital world defended by conventional forces. Instead, they found something that challenged everything they thought they knew about space combat. The planet itself was defended by a living network of orbital platforms that had been grown rather than built. They moved like sea anemones, swaying, to avoid incoming fire while releasing clouds of defensive organisms. When Council ships fired energy weapons, the platforms absorbed the energy and used it to grow stronger. Admiral Moon stood on the bridge of Eden's Heart as the Council's main battle fleet approached New Terra. Around her, the bio-neural networks hummed with activity as information flowed between hundreds of Commonwealth ships, orbital platforms, and ground-based systems. "Council fleet is demanding surrender," reported her communications officer. "Open a channel to all ships," Admiral Moon ordered. "All ships, all frequencies." The main display activated, showing Admiral Moon's face to every ship in both fleets. Behind her, the bridge of Eden's Heart pulsed gently with bioluminescent light, making it clear that this was no ordinary warship. "General Thack, Speaker Zenth, Counselor Vex," she began, addressing the Council commanders directly. 3 years ago, you decided that the Viridians weren't worth saving. You called them weak, primitive, useless. You said the same about the Aquarans, the Lithians, and every other species that didn't fit your definition of strength. She paused, looking out at the assembled fleets. But we saved them anyway. And in saving them, we learned something important. Real strength doesn't come from dominating others. It comes from lifting others up. General Thack's voice crackled across the communication channels. "Enough speeches. Surrender now, or we will destroy your fleet." "You're welcome to try," Admiral Moon replied. "But first, let me show you what we've built together." The Commonwealth fleet began to move, but not in any formation the Council had ever seen. Individual ships flowed together like drops of water combining, forming larger structures that pulsed with shared consciousness. The orbital platforms around New Terra began to sing, literally sing, producing harmonic frequencies that resonated through space. And then the Council fleet found itself surrounded by something impossible, a living system that spanned the entire star system. Ships, platforms, even asteroids connected by invisible networks of bio-neural communication. It was as if the Commonwealth had turned the entire system into a single, vast organism. "Impossible," breathed Speaker Zenth. "How did they do this?" "By learning to think differently," Admiral Moon replied. "Your species have spent millennia trying to conquer nature. We learned to become part of it. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything in galactic history. The Council fleet fired with everything they had, but their weapons seemed to have no effect. Energy beams were absorbed and redirected. Physical projectiles were caught by field networks and gently deflected into space. Even when Council weapons hit their targets, the bioships simply healed themselves and continued fighting. Meanwhile, the Commonwealth response was elegant and precise. Instead of trying to destroy the Council ships, they disabled them. Bioorganisms that could shut down specific systems while leaving life support intact. Gravitational fields that could hold ships motionless without harming their crews. Neural disruptors that could render entire ship crews unconscious for hours. One by one, the Council ships found themselves drifting helpless in space. Their crews were alive and unharmed, but their vessels were completely disabled. General Thack, from his disabled flagship, transmitted one last message. "This isn't war. This is something else." "Yes," Admiral Moon agreed. "This is what happens when species learn to work together instead of trying to dominate each other." The aftermath of the Battle of New Terra changed everything. The old Galactic Council dissolved within months as member species realized that the Commonwealth's approach offered something better than endless competition and military dominance. 5 years later, Captain Han Ji-woo, now an elderly admiral, walked through the gardens of New Terra's capital city. Around him, children of a dozen different species played together among plants that seemed to respond to their laughter. Human children with bright eyes learned patience from Viridian teachers. Young Viridians discovered the joy of quick thinking from human playmates. Aquaran youngsters taught everyone how to swim through the city's living waterways. "Was it worth it?" asked Dr. Park Minji, walking beside him. She was older, too, her hair silver now, but her eyes still bright with curiosity. Admiral Jiwoo smiled, watching a human girl and a Viridian child work together to help a small tree grow toward the sunlight.